Hello everyone, hope you are doing well. This is part 11 of Rhetoric or Figures of Speech series. In this video, I shall discuss a few more important questions for your final examination, and this video is meant for honors students. The first question. Identify and explain figures of speech in the following passages. Number 1. For always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known, cities of main and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honoured of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. So there are several figures of speech in this passage. Number 1, there is a transferred epithet in hungry heart. Here the epithet hungry has been transferred to heart, though it properly belongs to the speaker I. Here that speaker is Ulysses. Next, there is a case of hyperbaton in much have I seen and known. So there is an inversion of the regular grammatical order of words in this sentence. The order should be I have seen and known much. Next, there is a case of asyndeton in manners, climates, councils, governments, because there is the omission of the conjunction and after the word councils. Next, there is a litotes in the phrase myself not least. I hope you still remember the definition of litotes. In a litotes, a strong affirmative idea is expressed by the negation or denial of its opposite. So here, a strong affirmative idea, that is great, is expressed by the negation of its opposite, not least. Okay. So next, there are two cases of onomatopoeia in the last line. The ringing plains of windy Troy. The sound of the word ringing echoes the sense, and the word windy also does the same thing. Next, there are several cases of alliteration in the first line. The letter H is repeated at the beginning of two successive words, hungry and heart, and then the letter C is repeated at the beginning of successive words, climates and councils, and in the third case, the letter D is repeated at the beginning of drunk and delight, two successive words. Next, there is a case of allusion in the last line, the ringing plains of windy Troy. So, the use of the word Troy recalls to one's mind the Battle of Troy that followed after the abduction of Helen. Next, there is a case of hyperbole in drunk delight of battle with my peers, because the statement is exaggerated. Next, the expression far on the ringing plains of windy Troy contains a vision, because an imaginary picture is vividly presented here. Next, there is a metaphor in the phrase drank delight of battle. Here, a comparison is made between two unallied objects, drink and delight of battle. The point of comparison is implied. Okay, so these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Next question is, there lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail, there gleam the dark, broad seas, my mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads, you and I are old. So there are several figures of speech here. Number 1, there are two cases of personification. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. In this line. So, here inanimate objects, pot and vessel, are given the attributes of a living being in lies and pups and also har in these words. Next, there lies the port, the vessel pups her sail. There gleam the dark broad seas is also a case of vision. Here the whole scene is vividly presented. Next, there are two cases of hyperbaton in there lies the port and there gleam the dark broad seas. Here the regular grammatical order of words are the port lies there and the dark broad seas gleam there. These are found inverted. Next, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me is a case of climax. Here the words are arranged likewise in toiled, wrought, and thought. So, in ascending order of importance, they have been arranged in an ascending order of importance. And next, there is a case of polysyndeton in the sentence, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me. Here, the excessive use of the connecting conjunction and is found. The purpose is no doubt to achieve force and emphasis. Next, there is a case of synecdoche also in the sentence, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought. Here, souls are substituted for men. Soul is a part of man, and this is a case of the part for the whole. Next, there is a case of alliteration in the line free hearts, free foreheads. So, the letter F is repeated at the beginning of nearly successive words, free, free and foreheads. Next, there is there is also synecdoche in free hearts, free foreheads. So here the expression is used to substitute men with free hearts and free foreheads. This is a case of the part for the whole. Next, the thunder and the sunshine is a case of antithesis. Thunder and sunshine are two contrasted words placed side by side for the sake of emphasis, for the sake of emphasizing changes in the weather. Next, there is a transferred epithet in frolic welcome. Welcome is not frolic, but the people are frolic. Here, frolic is transferred from they to welcome. So, these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Next question is, art has not anything to show more fair, dull would he be of soul who could pass by. A sight so touching in its majesty, this city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning, silent, bare, ships, towers, domes, theatres, and temples lie open into the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. There are several figures of speech in the passage. Number one, there are two cases of personification. In the first place, earth, a natural element, is invested with a living attribute in the verb has and show. In the second place, ships, towers, domes, theatres, and temples, all inanimate objects, have been given the attributes of a living being in the verb lie. Next, the first line, art has not anything to show more fair, is so a case of hyperbole. The statement is exaggerated. Next, the city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning is a case of simile. Here two unallied objects compared are garment and beauty of the morning. The point of comparison is made explicit by the word like. Next, there is a case of hyperbaton in dull would he be of soul. Here, this is the inversion of the normal grammatical order of word. He would be of dull soul. This has been done to secure emphasis. Next, there are two alliterations in a sight so touching in its majesty. So here the letter S is repeated in the beginning of successive words sight and so. Again the letter I is repeated in and its successive words. Next, um, this is also a case of hyperbole, a sight so touching in its majesty, for that statement is exaggerated. Next, another alliteration is uh, found in tower, theatres, and temples. The letter T is repeated at the beginning of the nearly successive words. Next, the from the line "the beauty of the morning" till the last line "the smokeless air" is a case of vision. An absent picture is vividly presented here. Next, there is another case of personification in "city now doth like a garment wear." City, an abstract idea, has been given the attributes of a living being in the verb wear. So these are the figures of speech that we find in the passage. Now we are moving on to the next question. With varying vanities from every part, they shift the moving toy shop of their heart, where wigs with showed nots strive, views banish views, coaches drive. So there are several figures of speech in the given passage. Number one, there are several cases of alliteration in the first place. The letter V has been repeated at the beginning of successive words, varying and vanities. In the second place, the letter W has been repeated at the beginning of where, wigs, with, wigs, and with successive words, these successive words. In the third place, the letter S has been repeated at the beginning of successive words, sowed nots, and strive. In the fourth place, the letter B has been repeated at the beginning of views, banish, views, successive words. In the fifth place, the letter C has been repeated in the beginning of coaches. So, two successive words. Next figure of speech in the passage is a metaphor. So, toy shop of their heart. In this phrase, two unallied objects are implicitly compared. Toy shop and heart. These are the two unallied objects. Next, there are two cases of metonymy. Here, weeks and sword knots are substituted for gallant young men. This is a case of the sign or symbol for the thing symbolized. Next, there are two cases of personification. In the first place, wigs and sword knots to inanimate objects have been given the attributes of a living being in strive. In the second place, the coaches, inanimate objects, are given the attributes of a living being in the verb drive. Next figure of speech uh, can be found in the phrase coaches drive. This is a case of metonymy. The passengers of the coaches are here indicated. This is a case of the container for the thing contained. Next, from varying vanities from every part. This is a case of hyperbole, for the statement is exaggerated. Next, they shift the moving toy shop of their heart, also includes a hyperbole for the statement is exaggerated. Okay, so these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Now, let's move on to the next question. Love in these labyrinths his slaves detains, and mighty hearts are held in slender chains with hairy springes. We, the birds, betray. Slight lines of hair surprise the finny prey. Fair tresses man's imperial race ensnare, and beauty draws us with her single hair. Again, so in this passage, we also find several figures of speech. Number one, there is a case of personification in love in these labyrinths his slave detains. So, love, which is an abstract idea, is given the attributes of a living being in the expression his slave detains. Okay? Next, there are two cases of synecdoche. In the first place, hearts are substituted for men. This is a case of part for the whole. In the second place, beauty is substituted for beautiful women. This is a case of the abstract for the concrete. Next, there are two cases of hyperbaton in love in these labyrinths his slave detains, and in the sentence, with hairy springes we the birds betray. So, the regular grammatical orders of words are love detains his slave, and in the next sentence, we betray the birds with hairy springes. But there is an inversion of the correct grammatical order of words in these cases. Next, finny prey is a case of periphrasis. Here, the idea fish is expressed in a roundabout way through finny prey. There are also two cases of hyperbole. In the first place, there is an exaggeration in the expression that mighty hearts are held in slender chains, and in the second place, it is too much to say that fair tresses man's imperial race ensnare, and beauty draws us with her single hair. Next, there are some other cases of personification. Like fair tresses, some inanimate object are given the attributes of a living being in the verb ensnare, and beauty, an abstract idea, is given the attributes of a living being in the verb draws. Then slight lines of hair, some inanimate objects are given the attributes of a living being in the verb surprise. So, and the last one, there is a transferred epithet in man's imperial race. The epithet imperial is transferred from man to race. So, these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Now, let us move on to the next question. For who to dumb forgetfulness a prey, this pleasing anxious being, ever resigned, left the warm precincts of the cheerful day, nor cast one longing, lingering look behind. So, number one, the whole expression has an interrogation. The interrogation consists in a question, the answer to which is obvious and implied in the very question. Here, a question is put, the answer, none, is implied in it. Next, there is a metaphor in the first line. Here, the person is compared to a prey of forgetfulness. These are two unallied objects, and the point of comparison is implied. The implied comparison is also between forgetfulness and the bird of prey, two unallied objects. Next, there is a case of personification in forgetfulness, an abstract idea in the words dumb and pray. Next, there is an oxymoron in pleasing answers. Here, pleasing and answers to contradictory words are juxtaposed. Next, there is also a case of transferred epithet in warm precincts of the cheerful day. The epithet warm belongs properly to day, but this is transferred to precinct. Here, day and precincts are obviously associated. Next, this is also a case of periphrases. Here, warmth of life is expressed in a roundabout way through the expression warm precincts of the cheerful day. Next, there is a personification in cheerful day. Here, the word day, which is an abstract idea, is invested with the attributes of a living being through the word cheerful. So, this is a case of personification. Next, there is an alliteration in longing, lingering look. The letter L is repeated at the beginning of successive words longing, lingering, and look. This this also has an accendaton. Here, the connecting conjunction and is dropped before look. Okay. So these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Now we are moving on to the next one. Sweet are the uses of adversity which, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head, and this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. So the passage contains a number of figures of speech. Number one, there is an epigram in sweet are the uses of adversity. The apparent meaning of the expression seems contradictory and shocking for how the uses of adversity can be sweet. But there is an inner significance that adversity has a useful role in life. Next, the line is also a case of hyperbaton. The uses of adversity are sweet is the correct grammatical order, but that has been inverted here. Next, a simile is found in adversity, which, like the toad. So, a comparison is made between two unallied objects, adversity and toad, and the point of comparison is clearly shown through the word like. Next, there is a personification in adversity, uh, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. So, adversity, an abstract idea, is invested with the attributes of a living being in the words wears and his head. Next, another personification is seen in the expression and this our life exempt from public haunt finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks. So here life, an abstract idea, gets the attributes of a living being in the verb finds. Next, there is a metonymy in tongues in trees. The word tongue is used to substitute the voice. This is a case of the cause for the effect. Next, an alliteration of T is seen in tongues and trees, nearly successive words. Next, there are several metaphors in the passage. Uh, Implied comparisons are made here between tongues and trees, books and brooks, sermons and stones, and in all these cases the compared things are unallied. Next, uh, there is a personification in running brooks, because the natural element brook is invested with the attributes of a living being in the word running. Next, sermon in stones has a synecdoche. Here, the mountain is substituted by stones. This is a case of the part for the whole. And last one is there is a hyperbole in good in everything because the statement is here exaggerated. It is too much to say that everything is good. Okay? So these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Now I am moving on to the next one. Ethereal minstrel, pilgrim of the sky, dost thou despise the earth where cares abound? Or while the wings aspire, our heart and eye, both with thy nest upon the dewy ground? The following figures of speech can be found in the passage. There is an apostrophe in the very first line. A short impassioned address is here made to ethereal minstrel, an element of nature, imagining this as living and listening to the poet. If you have already read the poem, then you must have understood that this is a reference to the bird skylark. So, next, there is a periphrasis uh, in ethereal minstrel. This is used to mean the skylark in a roundabout way. Next, the first line also has a metaphor. Here, ethereal minstrel and pilgrim of the sky, two unallied objects are compared, and the point of comparison is implied. And next, this the expression pilgrim of the sky is also a periphrasis. The bird is here expressed in a roundabout way. The expression where cares abound contains an exaggerated statement, hence this is a hyperbole. And next, there is another case of periphrasis in wings aspire, in the sense soars, wings soars. So next, there is a personification in wings aspire. An inanimate object wing is given the attribute of a living being in the verb aspire. Next, there is a reason in while the wings aspire our heart and eye both with thy nest upon the dewy ground. So an imaginary picture is presented in a lifelike way. And next, there are interrogations in the last three lines. In an interrogation, the question raised has its answer implied in the sentence itself. Here, the answers no and yes are obviously implied. Next, arc is suggested in a roundabout way in the expression dewy ground. So, this is also a case of periphrasis. So, these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Now, I am moving on to the next question. Oh, for a beaker full of warm south, full of the true, the blushful Hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple stained mouth. So, the figures of speech that we find in the passage are number one, here an exclamation can be found in the first line. The exclamation consists in an expression of emotion or desire, and it usually has an interjection. Here, an expression of desire is introduced by the interjection "oh". Next, the line also has two cases of metonymy. Uh, Here, wine is substituted by beaker, in which this is kept. This is a case of the container for the thing contained. Again, the word south is used to substitute the wine manufactured in southern parts of France. This is an instance of place for its production. Next, there is a pallilogia in the second line. The same word is reiterated in pallilogia. So here the word the is found reiterated in the second line. Next, there is an allusion in Hippocrene. This recalls the Greek legend connected with the fountain of Hippocrene. Next, there is a periphrasis in Blushful Hippocrene. So, reddish wine is expressed here in a roundabout way. Next, Hippocrene also contains a metonymy. Hippocrene is said, but the water of Hippocrene is meant. The former is the source or the cause, and the latter is the effect. So this is the case of the cause for the effect. Next, the alliteration of B is found in beaded bubbles and brim, nearly successive words. Next, there is also personification here in the phrase beaded bubbles winking at the brim. So, beaded bubbles, inanimate objects, are given the attributes of a living being through the word winking. There is a vision in purple stained mouth. The absent picture is presented here vividly. So these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Now I'm moving on to the next one. Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censor, but reserve thy judgment. Costly thy habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy. There are several figures of speech in the passage. First, there are two cases of antithesis in give every man thy ear but few thy voice. This one, and the next one is take each man's censor but reserve thy judgment. In these two cases, contrasted ideas are set in a balanced form, and the purpose in both the cases is to emphasize the lesson for the way of life. Next, there is a metonymy in thy purse can buy. Here, purse is substituted for money that it contains. This is an instance of the container for the thing contained. Next, there is a personification in the expression thy purse can buy. So, purse, an inanimate object, is invested with the attribute and action of a living being in the verb can buy. Next, there is a case of pallilogia in the line costly thy habit as thy purse can buy. Here, there is the reiteration of the same word thy in the line. So now I am moving on to the next question. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. So the following figures of speech can be found in the passage. First, there is an interrogation in the line, oh sir, she smiled no doubt from here till much the same smile. Okay. So here a question is raised, but its answer none is obvious and supplied in the very question. Next, there is a climax in this grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. So here ideas this grew, I gave commands, and then all smiles stopped together are arranged in an ascending order of importance. Next, this is also a case of ascendaton. The connecting conjunction and, which ought to have come before the third clause, is dropped to secure emphasis and force. Next, there are several cases of alliterations in sir, she smile. So the letter S is repeated in these successive words. Then same smile. Again, the letter S is repeated in successive words and then smiles stopped. The letter S is repeated in the two successive words. Next, there is a case of personification in smiles stopped together. So, a smile, an abstract idea, is given the attributes of a living being in the verb stopped. Next, there is also a hyperbole in the statement for it is exaggerated. So, these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Next, that time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare green choirs where late the sweet birds sang. So here you will find a metaphor in the first line. An implied comparison is made between that time of year and me, that is the poet, two unallied objects. Next, you will find a polysyndeton in the second line, yellow leaves or none or few. The conjunction or is excessively used here. Next, you will find a hyperbole in the line, yellow leaves or none or few. An exaggerated statement is made here. In the third line, you will find one personification. Here, boughs, the element of nature, get the attributes of a living being in the verb shake. In the third line, you will also find one metonymy, cold for cold wind. So, effect for the cause. The last line is a case of metaphor, bare ruined choirs and me, that is the poet, unallied objects are compared in an implicit way. The last line is also a case of metonymy. Choir has been used to mean cathedral. So this is a case of the container for the thing contained. Then there is a case of metaphor. An implied comparison is made between boughs and ruined choirs, two unallied objects, in an implicit way. Next, there is a vision in the lines when yellow leaves or none or few do hang up in those boughs which shake against the cold. Uh, an absent picture is vividly presented through these words. So these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Now I am moving on to the next question. Love's not time's fools, though rosy lips and cheeks, within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the age of doom. There is a personification in the first line. Love and time are personified. In two abstract ideas are given the attributes of living beings in the phrase within his bending sickle's compass come. Okay. So next there is a case of metaphor in the phrase rosy lips and cheeks. So rose and lips and rose and cheeks, unallied objects, these are compared implicitly. And there is also an implied comparison between time and reaper, two unallied objects. Next, there is a personification in the line love alters not with his brief hours and weeks. So, love, an abstract idea, is given the attributes of a living being in the verbs alters and bears. Next, Time is also personified here. Time, an abstract idea, is personified in his brief hours and weeks. So there is also the personification of lips and cheeks in the verb come. Lips and cheeks come within his bending sickle's compass. Next, in rosy lips and cheeks, there is the periphrasis of youthful beauty. Youthful beauty is expressed in a roundabout way through these phrase. Next, there is a case of periphrasis in the expression age of doom, which means in a roundabout way doomsday. Next, there is a case of hyperbaton in the phrase though rosy lips and checks within his bending sickle's compass come. So here the regular grammatical order has been inverted. So these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. Next, whether the nymph shall break Dinah's law, or some frail china jar receive a flaw, or stain her honor or her new brocade, forget her prayers or miss a masquerade. In this passage, we find several figures of speech. Number one, there is a case of allusion in Dinah's law. The Roman goddess of moon is referred to here. Next, there is a case of periphrasis in the word nymph. The heroine of the poem, or if you have read this poem, you must understand that this is Belinda. So, Belinda is referred to here in a roundabout way. Next, there is a case of metonymy in China jar. So, China actually refers to clay of China. The jar is made of clay of China, a case of the place for its production. Next, there is a personification in China jar receive a flaw. The inanimate object China jar has been given the attributes of a living being in receive. There is a case of polysyndeton in the excessive use of the conjunction or in the last three lines, or some frail china jar receive a flaw or stain her honor or her new brocade, forget her prayers or miss a masquerade. Okay. Now, there is a synecdoche in brocade. Dress, brocade is a dress of brocade, the material for the thing made. And there is a case of epanaphora in the use of or at the beginning of the second and the third line. Okay. There are also several cases of anticlimax. In the first two lines, whether the nymph shall break Dinah's law or some frail china jar receive a flaw. So there is a sudden fall from nymph shall break Dinah's law to frail china jar receive a flaw, and the purpose is comical. This is one case of anticlimax and bathos. The next is or stain her honor or her new brocade. So again, there is a sudden fall from honor to brocade. So this is also a case of anticlimax. And the third one is forget her prayer or miss a masquerade. There is a sudden fall from the lofty thought, forget her prayer, to the commonplace idea, miss a masquerade. And the effect is quite comical. And this makes the lady ridiculous. Okay? So, yes, these are the figures of speech that we find in the passage. Now, I am moving on to the next question. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That is the madman, the lover, all as frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt, The poet's eye in a fine frenzy rolling doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven. So there is a pallilogia in the first line. The word the is repeated thrice in the first line. There is a case of hyperbole in the first two lines because this is an exaggerated statement. There is an hyperbole in one sees more devils than vast hell can hold, another exaggerated statement. There is an allusion in Helen, Helen's beauty, this phrase. So, reference to the Queen of Athens, Helen, has been made. There is a case of synecdoche in brow of Egypt. So, face is substituted by brow, a part for the whole. There is a case of metonymy in the phrase in the word Egypt for Egyptian woman, container for the thing contained. There is an alliteration of s in fine and frenzy, successive words. There is a case of chiasmus in the last line. Heaven to earth, this phrase is inverted to earth to heaven and is used in the same line. Next, there is a case of personification in the poet's eye in a fine frenzy rolling doth glance. The inanimate object eye has the function of a living being in doth glance. So these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. And another thing that in the first line there is also an alliteration of there is also an alliteration. The letter L is repeated in lunatic and lover, nearly successive words. Now I'm moving on to the next question. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this and this gives life to thee. So there are hyperboles in thy eternal summer shall not fade, then eternal lines to time thou growest, and so long lives this gives life to thee. These are all exaggerated statements. There are several cases of personifications. In the first case, summer, an abstract idea, is personified in the word lose. And in the second case, death, again an abstract idea, is personified in the words shall brag and his. There is a case of synecdoche in the word fair. It is substituted for the fair body, so abstract for the concrete. There is a case of epanaphora in uh, repetition of the word nor at the beginning of two successive lines, the second and the third line. And again, there is a case of epanaphora in the last two lines where the words so long have been repeated at the beginning of successive lines. Next, there is a case of hyperbaton in nor shall death brag. The regular grammatical order has been inverted here, and also in when in eternal lines to time thou growest. In this line, and again there is another case of hyperbaton in the last line. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So all these are cases of hyperbatons where the regular grammatical order of words has been inverted. Next, there is a case of periphrasis in can breed, that means live, and shade means dark realm. So these two have been referred to in a roundabout way. So these are the figures of speech that we find in this passage. I hope you have found this video useful. If you find this video useful, please do like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thank you all, and all the best for your examination. Keep watching, keep learning. Thank you all.